Well, Parliament resumes for its spring session tomorrow. Politics has been a bare-knuckle brawl all year, and the run to Christmas won't be any different. The Gillard government will try to push through controversial bills on carbon tax, mining tax and health reform. Plus, it still faces a range of other tricky problems, from the economy to border protection. Here's 7:30's political editor, Chris Ullman.
Winter's bitter grip on Canberra is loosening. Parliament's spring session begins tomorrow and the politicians are back in town.
Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Okay.
Tony Abbott spent the last couple of weeks abroad.
Let me just get my bags and we'll say a few words.
And he spent the last couple of days cleaning up a few words he uttered on Friday.
If you don't want something to happen on your land, you ought to have a right to say no.
In conversation with radio host Alan Jones, Tony Abbott blundered into a fierce battle raging between farmers and miners over prospecting on agricultural land. The problem with farmers just saying no to miners is that minerals belong to the states, not landowners. By Saturday, Tony Abbott's dilemma was apparent, but the way out apparently wasn't.
I had something to say about that yesterday, and again, I'm happy to let that stand.
Okay, so what is your position on that issue?
I had something to say about that yesterday, and I'm happy to let that stand.
This morning there was a tactical retreat.
Now, land use decisions are very important, but they are fundamentally a matter for the state governments. I think the mining industry is very important, and we've got to broadly support the mining industry. But mining shouldn't be allowed to destroy prime agricultural land, and mining companies should always respect the rights of farmers.
But the government's not about to let slip a rare opportunity to kick its tormentor.
To let Alan Jones determine policy is absolutely horrifying.
Even if it wrestles with the matter itself.
I've been on the record in the past that I think that rich arable farming land needs to be looked after, but you can't do it the way Tony Abbott's saying that it should be done.
The Greens think it can.
Tony Abbott on Friday said farmers should have a right to say no. The way to do that is to legislate, to give them that right to say no. And we can legislate using the corporations' power in the Constitution, and we Greens intend to do that.
The fight is already before Parliament through a Senate inquiry into coal seam gas.
What the Greens are doing is really trying to preempt where the Senate inquiry may go, and in so doing they're not assisting, in fact they're driving people away.
Words are hard currency in politics, so Tony Abbott can expect to endure some grief for this misstep during this sitting week. And the government has some word trouble of its own. It's hung its economic credibility on a return to a modest $3 billion surplus next year.
I can assure every Australian that their budget will be back in surplus in 2013.
But as the house of cards that is the Western world's financial system totters, the government's oft-repeated pledge is beginning to be qualified.
It makes the challenge of bringing the budget back to surplus in 2012-13 more difficult. But it is certainly our objective to return the budget to surplus in 2012-13, and we expect to achieve that.
As Cabinet convened this afternoon, the Prime Minister was preparing for a hectic 3 months.
In this parliamentary session, we've got some big legislation to deliver, legislation that's right in the Labor tradition.
There's a heap of legislation and some of it will be hotly debated. Highlights include clean energy bills setting up the carbon tax, the bills for a mining tax, axing the Howard-era Australian Building and Construction Commission that's hated by building unions and loved by the industry, a bill to make the tobacco industry wrap fags in plain packets, a move to restrict the importation and sale of illegally logged timber, a bill that's founded twice before in the Senate, aimed at cutting the private health insurance rebate for high-income earners. It would save the government $2.8 billion. This time its fate will be decided in the House.
And we will be putting before the Parliament all of the legislation necessary to enact the health reform agreement that I struck with Premiers and Chief Ministers during the winter recess.
But there are as many challenges for the government outside Parliament as in it.
We're also gathering at a time where people have watched instability in global markets and the global economy.
Beyond the small matter of economic security, there's a raft of issues roiling the electorate. The executive faces a tilt against its border protection plans in the High Court. It's managed to alienate both sides of the bitter fight over live cattle exports. Tomorrow, protesters will descend on Parliament to rail against the carbon tax and gay marriage. So it's a large task for a government at a low ebb to turn its fortunes around and try to instil confidence in a community that seems determined to see the glass as half empty.
There's no better place in the world to be than Australia as we deal with this global instability. Our economy is strong. We came out of the global financial crisis strong as a result of the work we as a government did with the Australian community, including employers and unions, to keep people in work. So I think the whole nation can be proud of the economy we've built together.